plane's flight path. "Jenn?" "What?" "I said—" "I heard you, Dad. Thanks a lot." "That time you climbed and base-jumped the Burj Khalifa." "You're not helping." He must have heard her blooming anger, because he fell silent. She glanced to her right and across the aisle without moving her head, and saw what she expected. Her father relaxed back in his seat, wearing a contented smile. While the plane vibrated around them and promised to shake itself apart, scattering them all across the deep valley below, his mind was way ahead. He was always 1 step or 1 minute in the future. "You call this flying?" G said from the cramped seat behind her. "Flying implies grace and control. This is more like a long fall." As if in response, the plane dropped with a loud thud that shook through the entire fuselage, bouncing through an area of turbulence before leveling and returning to its previous state of imminent disaster. Jen's heart stuttered, and she squeezed the seat and Aaron's hand even harder. From up ahead the pilot shouted something in Spanish and laughed, the same throaty cough he'd offered when G had suggested that his pride and joy might be more suited to a scrap heap. Jenn thought she'd heard something break during that last brief bout of turbulence. The sight of the aircraft before they'd boarded had almost been enough to convince her to abort their expedition and go back to the drawing board, but Aaron had persuaded her it would be safe. "I know a guy who knows this guy," he'd said. "He keeps it looking like this to avoid any unwanted attention. That plane's like your dad, grizzled, grumpy, and decrepit on the outside, but perfect mechanical order beneath the skin." The memory brought a nervous smile, and she glanced sidelong at her father once more. He raised an eyebrow and 1 corner of his mouth in response. In his early 50s, he was the most experienced explorer among them, with enough exploits to fill a dozen books, were he of a mind to write them. He sometimes talked about retirement and memoirs, but she knew that was still decades away. He'd never be the sort to sit at home watching TV, even if he had a TV to watch, or indeed a home. In a world suffocating beneath the excessive weight and waste of humanity, there were still places left for him to explore and race across. Valleys and islands, plains and forests, where the toxic taint of people was still slight enough to not be seen, so long as you didn't look too closely. That was sometimes his problem, looking too closely. Her dad was still the center of her existence, the star around which she orbited. Though Aaron had come into her life a few years ago, and she loved him, and saw a future with him, it was her dad she looked for whenever she found herself staring out into the big black. There was another shout from in front. She held her breath, staring past Cove's head at the open cockpit door. The pilot seemed unable to sit still, constantly tweaking the instrument panel, gesturing from the window, talking to himself, and flicking plastic dials with his finger. "Turn it off and turn it on again," Aaron shouted, and Jenn gave his hand a crushing squeeze that ground bones. Maybe that would cover the sound of the plane breaking apart, at least. He didn't protest. They drifted left and right along the winding valley, and when Jenn dared to look, she imagined she could see tree limbs flicked by the wings, branches broken and leaves sprayed outwards. They were so close she could have reached out and plucked fruit. Such a dangerous flight was the price they had to pay to avoid popping up on the Zed's radar, and that was a prerequisite for them entering Eden undetected. If the Zeds knew they were there, they'd be pursued until they landed or were brought down. Over time, the Zone Protection Force had diverged into vastly different entities from place to place, country to country. But the aspect that continued to unite them was their tenacity and dedication to their cause. The team would still be a solid 6 hours' hike from the Virgin Zone's southern boundary when they landed, but this way they'd be fresh and fully supplied when they infiltrated and prepared for the dangerous crossing. They were about to break enough laws to put them all in jail for a very long time. "Check that out," G said. Jenn looked past Aaron and out of the window again, lit by a gorgeous dawn.